Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Wheel of Mind podcast, a character point of view reread podcast dedicated to Robert Jordan's The Wheel of Time series. This season, we're taking a deep dive into Moiraine's point of view. I'm Lajara Dane of the White Aja.
Hi, and I'm Giskell Samaris, a scholar from Ilion. Now, I do want to give you a spoiler warning. We don't often throw in a lot of spoilers, but when we do, they're unannounced. We're liable to draw in details from any of the 15 books. So if you have not read the entire Wheel of Time series, I want to give you this warning. You shall not pass. Oh, wait, wrong story, but you get the idea. Yeah, we do recommend you read the entire story before listening to this podcast. Now, today we're here to discuss Moiraine's brief point of view in chapter 53 of The Eye of the World, and then we'll go into our favorite moments, or Moiraine moments from that book. Lajara, you want to get us started, please?
Sure. Chapter 53 is the final chapter in The Eye of the World called The Wheel Turns, and that's the only place we have a Moiraine point of view in it. We're in Rand's point of view during the aftermath of the battle at the Eye of the World. The Blight is already reclaiming the Green Man's place. Loyal uses his tree singing skills to restore the oak that now stands for where the Green Man fell. At least this one tree will not fall to the Blight. They leave the place and can no longer see it after they walk out. Rand sees the 7 towers of Malkir and gets weird glimpses of them whole, topped with golden crane banners. Lan and Nynaeve, leading Mandarb and Aldeeb respectively, are stealing glances at each other, but never making eye contact. Moiraine is lying on a stretcher between them, borne by the 2 horses. The Blight seems quiet, maybe subdued for a time, and they do not have to fight their way out as they did to come in. Moiraine, Egwene, and Nynaeve set wards around a campsite and they sleep. As they ride out of the Blight in the morning, they find that spring has finally sprung after an unnaturally long winter. They dealt Team Shadow a mighty blow indeed. When they get back to Fal Dara, everyone is celebrating the spring and the victory against the Shadowspawn forces at Tarwin's Gap. Some people suggest bringing a healer for Moiraine, but she insists on them all being taken to Lord Agilmar immediately. He's unhappy, because the victory seemed to come at the price of a man channeling, opening the earth to swallow the Shadowspawn. Moiraine checks whether Padon Fain is still secure, which Agilmar says he is. She shows him the Horn of Valir, which he wants to use to defend against returning Shadowspawn hordes in the future, but Moiraine insists it must be taken to Ilion to rally the people there. A week later, Rand is practicing sword forms with Lan. Rand is free to go and do as he wishes, according to Moiraine, via Lan. Egwene walks up on this conversation, asking if he will come to Tar Valon with the rest, or go home to see Tam. Rand instead asks to leave, but to go anywhere but home, where he could put Emond's fielders at risk. Moiraine is lying in a bed chair in Agilmar's garden below, using her childhood eavesdropping trick and her blue stone to listen in on Lan, Rand, and Egwene. The prophecies will be fulfilled. The dragon is reborn, Moiraine whispered. And thus ends Chapter 53 of the first book of the Wheel of Time, The Eye of the World. So after this, I just have a bunch of points, like I said, sort of Moiraine highlights previously in the book. So we might discuss this piece a bit and then kind of backtrack and talk about what the reader would have learned about Moiraine up until this point. Did you have anything to say, Giskell, about just...
Yes, I finally got to find out what Moiraine's secret weave was. You know, it was mentioned early on in New Spring, and I had forgotten what it was. It had such a brief mention here. And so when I came across it on this, I'm like, yes, finally, I remember just her being able to eavesdrop using the stone, to hear someone a little further away than normal. And again, just like she explained to Egwene over and over again, there's nothing magical about the stone itself. It's just the way she used it to focus and use the one power to be able to eavesdrop it. So yeah, I was glad to get that tidbit thrown in there, because all through the entire New Spring novel, I kept wanting to find out what it was again, because I had forgotten.
I was just going to say, we learn in around the time the tower splits in this with the Saladar Aes Sedai, that Aes Sedai tend to have secret weaves. We had also, again, this was covered in New Spring quite a bit, but this is brought up later in the series as well, especially when Nynaeve and Elaine keep making so-called discoveries of tricks with the one power, because they have Moghedien captured. So they've got a Forsaken held prisoner, sort of the way Rand did.
Right.
And they're able to say, hey, look, we discovered this brand new stuff. And some of it they actually did. Like Elaine is able to recover the making of Terran and that type of thing. But some of it, like, oh, we've discovered how to eavesdrop. And it's funny, just they say something like all of the Aes Sedai act too surprised. Like they
Right.
probably all have some kind of secret weave, and it turns out one of the more
Yes.
common ones probably is
It's
eavesdropping
eavesdropping, yes.
or
But
the
since
the
they
light
won't talk about it,
compulsion.
they don't know. Right.
Exactly, right. So the
Uh,
light compulsion, like we see Leandrin use a lot more forcefully at the beginning of the Great Hunt, is another probably more kind of amped up version of what some people I think are able to do. They're just able to kind of convince people of things a little easier than others.
right.
And I like this whole using the stone as a concentration thing because it's not something Moiraine normally needs to do or Aes Sedai normally need to do. They don't need a physical object to channel. I mean, the only objects that really aid that are Terangrial and Saangrial and Angrial. But I think that because Moiraine was a wilder and this was something she learned as a kid, um, I think you learn these things as a wilder when you don't know what you're doing. You don't really think about how you're weaving the flows. Something just kind of happens. And if it happens while you're looking at this blue stone, that may be the only way you know how
Right.
to do it because you were never formally taught that weave. You wouldn't know how to break it down to explain to anybody else what you're doing. Plus, you've also learned that you probably shouldn't be telling anybody else what you're doing. So,
Yeah, absolutely. It just becomes an intuitive thing you're seeking out, you're feeling your way through without the knowledge of how to do it.
so then even when you do know how to channel for real later, you probably still have to keep using those tricks of your secret weave because it's not something you formally learned.
Right.
There's not a eavesdropping weave that's taught anywhere.
Right. That makes sense. All right. So, unfortunately, we can't make a full episode out of two paragraphs, and one of them being one single sentence. So since this is about Moraine and she's featured all through the book, The Eye of the World, we want to just kind of recap her role here, since none of the rest of it's point of view, but it still kind of helps us get a feel for who we're dealing with here. Now, I'm not sure about you, Lajara. There are times here I kind of get the feeling that Robert Jordan had not completely fleshed out exactly how everything was going to work with Moraine. There are a few details that to me just doesn't really jive with the rest of the story, but that's very likely because I'm a man and don't pay attention to details. Um, you know, sorry, that's just how it goes. But no, if you would you can give us your thoughts and insights on things throughout the book, and then I'll kind of reciprocate, and we'll see if we can't come up with some good dialogue about Moraine.
Yeah, for sure. So I think I agree with you that there's a lot of kind of early book weirdness here of where Jordan hadn't fully figured out some of his world building. I do like the way the Watt Spoilers podcast goes about these types of things is that they try to give the most charitable interpretation to the work and try to find an in-world explanation, even if they have to kind of reach for it if it doesn't quite make sense. But even they tend to come up short a little bit in Eye of the World because it is the one that's the most different from the rest of the series.
Uh,
But a part of that is because, and I think Robert Jordan had talked about this, in order to be successful with this book and to get it published, it needed to speak the language that fantasy readers would know already.
right,
And much of that language would be Lord of the Rings based at the time. And so uh, to me, this story started very similar to the Lord of the Rings. And I think I must have read The Eye of the World, just the that one and not any of the others at some point in high school. Because when I went back last year and read the entire Wheel of Time series, I found a lot of The Eye of the World incredibly familiar, and I thought I'd read it before.
oh yeah,
Um, and part of that was because it is very tropey, but again, Jordan kind of felt like he needed to use that common language and a platform in order to do that. So I'll be pointing out some of those things and how Moiraine fills a role in those tropes and how she starts to deviate from those. So I remember when I read The Eye of the World, so I started reading through this whole series in early 2018. And I thought, okay, Black Cloaked Rider. I remember this. This is basically a Nazgul. It's this is a ring wraith. And then the Gleeman shows up and they see Tom. I'm like, okay, this must be the Gandalf. Isn't he like the boy's grandfather or something? How does this go? And then I realized, wait, was that the Belgariad? Um,
Oh, yes, yes.
maybe mild spoilers for the beginning of the Belgariad kids. Sorry about that, but so it was a little tropey where I was like, okay, blah blah blah, farm kid, and then I realized, okay, the Gleeman looks like he's not going to be that important, and then Moiraine starts to really take the stage. And
Right.
so I thought Tom in the beginning was going to be our Gandalf figure. He was really poised to be that until Moiraine shows up. And then they have an interesting scene in the beginning where they're both playing some game of houses, but you don't know it as a first time reader.
Right,
So
right.
when Moiraine and Tom first meet, she keeps calling him Master Bard as if she knows who he is. And maybe even if she doesn't know his identity exactly, she knows that he's more than a Gleeman. Um, and he keeps just humbly, talking about I'm going to tell whatever stories please you, Aes Sedai, um, clearly deferring to her power, but they were both saying a lot of things that the kids around them certainly don't understand, and I thought that was interesting. Personally,
Yes. And especially again, big spoiler here, since Moraine and Tom at the end of the entire series kind of wind up being a couple, it seems especially strange here. The first, he is probably as mistrustful of her as any of the Coplans or Congers everywhere. Uh, he at first he is let's see, it's in chapter 4. Yes, he sees her and they banter a little bit, but you could tell he looks displeased. And of course, we find out later about his nephew who was able to channel. It was gentle. So Tom has a very bad disposition toward Aes Sedai. He would just prefer to avoid them altogether. And then in chapter 7, I think it is when Rand brings his dad in and gets him there into the inn, trying to get help for him. And of course, the whole town is kind of in, and I know I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but the whole town's kind of in shreds from the Trolloc attack during the night. Um, finally, Egwene's father says, "Oh, well, we've got an Aes Sedai here. It said they can do healing, where regular medicines and all won't help because Nynaeve had just said, I can't help Tam. He's too close to death. Let me go help the people I can help. I'm sorry." And Tom finally says something like, "Well, I felt like that did not need to come from me."
yeah,
So,
he had been saying things to kind of push Bran to say that.
yes,
He
exactly.
seemed to say things unrelated, and it kind of nudged gently the other people in the room to take a.
Right, right. And I think his quote there, because I love a good pull quote. Goodman Copland isn't the only one who wants nothing to do with the Aes Sedai. Best the idea came from you. So yeah, it's kind of like get the point. This boy probably doesn't want to have anything to do with them. I certainly don't. So I'm gonna leave that up to you. If you think of it, fine. If you don't, fine. But yeah, it seems kind of strange to be that distrustful of them. And throughout much of this book, you see that. In fact, most of the series. So maybe I guess you could say their personalities grew on one another. And of course her letter to him much later in the series, where she knew what was going to happen to herself and basically sacrificed herself, but there was a chance to save her. I think that was kind of a turning point in that relationship. He decided, that he'd grown very fond of her. But yeah, at this point, it's strange incredulity to imagine them ever being a couple with this type of. It's not even a romantic tension. It's nothing more than just, I really don't like you and I want to go the other way if I can.
Yeah, I think we do get some early signs that they both sort of respect each other, knowing that they can play the game pretty well, and and a little bit of being impressed by each other. So, like when we think Tom has died at Whitebridge, and then Rand finds him again in the Foregate at Camelin,
Yes.
he says something about how we have the Horn of Valir, and Tom is like, well, I could show you 4 guys out on the street that will sell you the Horn of Valir. He thinks he's
Yes.
been scammed, and he said, well, Moiraine thinks it is. And then Tom's interest gets really perked up, and he says something about her, like, well, she is an Aes Sedai, but I mean, she seems like a pretty reasonable lady. He says all these things that sort of, I don't have any quotes in front of me, but that he sort of respects her. So if you know that they're going to end up together on a reread, you can start to see those seeds of kind of mutual
Okay.
respect start to build.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
there's a time like when they get to Terran Ferry, even in Eye of the World, and they're worried about getting mugged. They're
Yes.
standing there waiting for the ferry, and the the men all get their weapons kind of ready.
Right.
And Tom flicks a knife out of his sleeve and starts like cleaning his fingernails.
Yes.
And Moiraine laughs at him,
Yeah.
and that's not something you would really expect out of her. So she's
Well, that's
already kind of
true.
taking notice of him. And that could be some early book weirdness as well, where he hadn't had Moraine's character fully pinned down yet. But
Right.
if you go look for those nuggets, they're there. But on the first read, it feels like it's out of nowhere.
Right, right. It did to me. But now that you mention it, yeah, there were a few things like that that were very subtle. I didn't catch. So there's more than I really thought of there. But yeah, yeah. So cool stuff.
And I mean, I think Moiraine really is our Gandalf figure early because she's the one who whisks the kids out of the two rivers.
Right.
And I think that was innovative and cool for Jordan to do at the time, to make a small lady who doesn't look like our typical wizard trope to play that mentor role.
Yes.
And she and Tom both kind of take some of Gandalf's archetypal qualities. If you're going to think about who's the mentor and what role they serve in these kids' lives, they're both really important. But they sort of split off. Some of the boys get more time with one or the other. So Rand gets he gets quite a bit of balance, I think. But definitely more Rain later on, and
Right.
then Matt splits off more with Tom, and this is around the Dragon Reborn towards the beginning when this starts to happen. Matt splits off with Tom, and Perrin spends a lot of time with Moiraine. So separately, the boys have gotten these differing voices. I just found that interesting, to make a small magical lady the mentor figure. And
Right.
so on a first read, I thought that she was really in trouble because of this. I expected either her or Lan, because they both seemed very mentory to Rand at the time. I expected one or the other of them to die in the first book. And when that didn't happen, I was also interested.
Yes. Yes. Well, I kind of expected it somewhere throughout the series. Um, but when we perceived that Moraine died, I was just devastated. I'm like, you can't do this. You can't kill her off. Uh, but then to see her make it to the end of the series, I thought was really cool. And so yeah, I kind of like that. You didn't have to follow the same patterns. I had never thought about how the two of them in a way fill that mentor role between her and Tom. But it kind of makes sense now that you said it. I just had never really looked at it in that way. Obviously, there are some things here that remind us of the Lord of the Rings in some ways, and as you said, that was some tropes that basically had to be used to sell fantasy during that time. But at the same time, there's so much here this neat and unique that I love. Even though, again, this is early in the character development, we still see a little bit of the girlish side of Moiraine early on in the Two Rivers. When the boys first meet her, they're standing outside, they see a raven up on the pole, and Matt and Rand each grab a rock and throw at it, and the raven just sidesteps the throw, and it keeps looking at them. And they just look at each other like, "Have you ever seen a raven do that before?" And then Moraine says something about they're a vile bird at the best of times. They can be servants of the Dark One. And suddenly the raven takes off, with a squawk so fast that he loses two feathers. And I thought that was a switch of air. Now, my first time through the series, I didn't either. And well, I guess first two times through the Eye of the World, I
And
never
I've
thought it.
heard
Then,
so many analyses and read of these chapters one by one, and I haven't seen that anywhere.
but just coming right out of um, uh, I can't even say it, coming right out of New Spring and seeing, how she and Siouan used to be very mischievous and things. That was just something that she just, I'll teach that bird. Now, plus it served a vital, role because that was very likely a spy for the Dark One's armies. But at the same time, yeah, just that little touch of mischievousness. In my mind, she used a switch of air. Of course, in the first book here, the only references I found to the way the weaves are and how it weaves in the different elements, earth, fire, water, air, and spirit, was when they had crossed over the ferry. They were in their little hiding place, and she was talking to Egwene, and got Egwene to light up the stone just a little bit, just for a moment. And but Egwene said, "I know this is, the power is made up of these elements," and that's the only time that I found. Now I may be wrong, but it's the only time I found where that was mentioned, because we're not seeing things from the Aes Sedai point of view. We're seeing things from the backwoods country boys' point of view, basically for the majority of the book. So she doesn't explain that to him, though she does go into a lot of explanations that I think some of it was necessary. Some of it was probably just his way of getting in some world building early on. But I made a few notes here. Like at one point, she starts talking about basically the waning of the White Tower, which is something we heard all through New Spring. And I didn't catch it that it came out right here first in the eye of the world. But after she heals Tam, and she's using the Angreal to do it, and she talks about how many things are lost, many of the old things are lost, even the how we make the Angreals, all that's lost. Um, she speaks of the fading knowledge, fading numbers, and fading strength of the Aes Sedai. Yeah, I thought that was kind of interesting to bring that out. And then next chapter, chapter 9, when the townspeople all, they come up in an uproar with their pitchforks and torches, and they're gonna, they scratch the dragon fang on the door at the inn, and everybody's upset because they believe the Aes Sedai brought all these Trollocs into town, which obviously they were just running on emotion. If they had stopped to think for a minute, Lan and Moiraine killed more Trollocs than anybody else, probably everyone else put together. They were doing the best they could to save the Emmons Field and to save the town, the two rivers. But at the at the same point, she launches into this tale of Manetheren, and she launches into a tale that would make any Gleeman proud. I mean, you feel the pride of these people. Instead of standing there and preaching to them, well, you boys should know better than to act this way. She tells them of the pride of their ancestors, the fealty and the honor and the integrity with which their ancestors lived, so they could mentally compare themselves to it and bring themselves down, talk themselves off the cliff, so to speak.
Yeah.
She
Is
didn't have
this
to
what
tell them.
Aemon's blood has come to? Oh, I
Yes,
love
yes,
it. That speech always gives me chills.
yes. That was a good one, and so she kind of launches into storyteller mode there, and I like that. That's good, but again, it's also a way of of the of Robert Jordan, giving us some backfill, some backstory. Why is Emmonsfield important? Why are the two rivers important? The blood of Manetheren that flows so strongly through his veins. That was a reason for that.
Yeah, those both of those moments you mentioned could be seen as a little bit out of character because Moiraine is usually so secretive, and when people ask her, "Why are you doing this? Why are we doing that?" She, like in the beginning of The Dragon Reborn, Perrin is bugging her about, "Are you going to explain your motives to me?" And she's like, "Do you want me to? Do you want to sit here for 2 days while I explain it to you, or do you want us to just get stuff done?"
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so she's it's just stuff she's never thought to mention to anybody a lot of the
Right.
time. And so you could read those moments as a little bit out of character. Her talking so much about the waning of the tower to these peasants, like why would she be doing that? And then her
Right.
telling them this whole story, she probably would have just um, done whatever she could to slip out of the situation kind of quietly. But I also think so you could see that as some early book weirdness that he needed to use for world building, but you could also read it in story for in character reasons where she is just so fed up with this search that she's been doing for almost 20 years.
Yeah.
And she's pretty sure she's in the right place. And so she's kind of, especially when she's exhausted after this fight against the Trollocs, which is not something she's had to do anything similar to in an extremely long time.
Right. It's not that we've been told. Yes.
Right. Well, yeah, I guess so. Yeah, who knows what she did in that amount of time. I've got a little bit about that later, but yeah, when she's just so exhausted, when she's healing Tam, uh, she just blurts that stuff out. It
Yeah.
seems like, which seems unlike her, but I could see that she's just so fed up with it and so fed up with people not understanding the importance of her mission, and putting some stuff in there about the state of kind of the decline of the world in general.
Right.
I don't know. I don't know. There's a few different ways you might could interpret that, but it does come off on a reread as a little bit of early book weirdness. But I wouldn't have it any other way, especially with
Oh
that
no, no. That
tellings of the
and
wheel.
right, and even when they're getting ready to go into Shadow Logoth, she launches into storyteller mode again, tells them about the city of Aradal that it used to be, and the decline, the dark friends, the descent into madness and evil. But I also wonder, was she doing this because she knows there's something with these three boys at this point? And this is something again I didn't catch until this in-depth reread. She didn't really know which one is going to be the Dragon Reborn. I don't think. She did mention at one point, I think it's back when they were in Camelin, so about there being three Taverin, and when she expected one. So I think she had some clues that hey the Dragon Reborn may be in the Two Rivers area. She's going there searching for them. And I've heard some people talk about how she seems to have this gift of being able to recognize a Taverin. But to me, unless I missed something, because I kind of thought that was early on in the book too, but this time looking through it for this, I only found that reference when they were in Camelin.
Yeah, Loyal's the
And
one who told her about Taviran and told
yes,
everybody about it. I think he's
yes,
the first person to bring it up. I think
right.
Suwan's the one who has a gift for seeing it, because
Okay.
she can see a big glow around somebody. So she sees
Okay.
Rand when she comes to visit at the beginning of the Great Hunt, and she just sees him in the crowd, and she
Right.
has to keep her composure after she just
Okay.
looked right at him when he was just blazing like the sun. But I
Right.
don't
Okay.
think that I don't think
I
that
don't
Moiraine has an ability to sense them. So I think when
know.
Loyal says that the boys are Tavir, she's like, "Oh, that makes sense as to why it's all three of these
Right.
who seem like possible candidates." That okay?
Yes, I agree. And it is kind of like I think she pieced it together, her ability to read people and read puzzles and things, not like the blacksmith's puzzles like Siwan, but puzzles involving people and the personality and interactions. She kind of started figuring that out and probably had some big hints from men as well. So she knew all three of these important. You'll have all the readings about them from men that were so crazy all over the board. What does it mean? And she kind of put this stuff together. Well, one of these is probably the Dragon Reborn. Of course, the biggest clues was because the Dark Ones were after them so, with such fervor, sending all these Trollocs and Murdral after them. Um, and their three homes were the ones that were focused on in the attack. And yes, again, she's kind of saw this pattern, so she's piecing it together from clues. And in Loyal, once he says it out loud, it's just like boom, there it is. Everything locks into place. And again, it may be wrong. Maybe there's other references that I just missed, but that's not the way I remembered it. But that's what I found this time searching through. That
Yeah,
uh,
same. I mean, that's what I found on my rereads. I think once we understand the concept of Taviran, especially we see so much about how it works when we get to the Dragon Reborn, and that's how they follow
right.
Rand, is because he leaves all these weird um, events in his wake, too many weddings or lots of weird accidents or something like that. So that's how once we get how Taviran works at that point on a reread, you can see everything through that lens. And so I think it's
Yes.
easy to think that concept has been with us since the first couple of chapters, but it hasn't until
Right.
they were in Camelin, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
I want to back up a little bit
Yes.
and talk about one of it may either be Moraine's first appearance or one of her first appearances where she gives the coins to the boys,
Yes.
because she gives these coins to them and they are supposed to want to do what she says after that.
Right.
And so that feels a little compulsion-y. And it's funny because I said I have this strong taboo against, they can't teach the weave for actual compulsion.
Right.
But they can get away with a lot of other things that are technically legal, but are still compromising somebody's ability to choose their own actions. And I think this
Mm-hmm.
is one of those that's a little ethically, questionable, which
Right.
we know that Moiraine is apt to do things like that if she thinks it's for the greater good. We're not unfamiliar with that concept. And I found that interesting. And she doesn't, she's putting tracking devices with them, really, because she can
Yes.
track them with the coins later. And that's really creepy stuff to do to somebody if they don't know that you're doing that.
Right.
And that's one of the things that leads Nynaeve to especially hate and mistrust Moiraine later, because she's with, after they all split up at Shatter Logoth. I know this is really fast forwarding, but um, Nynaeve meets up with Lan and Moiraine while they're searching for everybody else. So she learns about how the coins are working then, and she's especially mistrustful of her at that point. And I would be
Yes.
too. I think we're kind of set up to not be sure exactly of her uh, allegiances, but she does make that pretty clear. One of my favorite Moiraine quote ever probably is when they are on their way to Baerlon, and it's right after they have been running the horses really hard, and she had to sort of heal or kind of take away the fatigue of the horses, and it turned out Rand had already done that.
Done it for
And
Bella.
so,
Yeah.
yeah, so Rand had his first bout of channeling sickness where he's very risky, doing a lot of things he normally wouldn't do that are kind of dumb. So he blurts out stuff about Aes Sedai being dark friends when he's arguing with Egwene. And Moiraine hears and says, "The Dark One is after you three, one or all. And if I let you go running off wherever you want to go, he will take you. Whatever the Dark One wants, I oppose. So hear this now and know it true. Before I let the Dark One have you, I will destroy you myself."
Yes. I wrote that one down in my notes as well. I was just that very quote, because we know now, and it's not brought out in this book at all. I don't think that Aes Sedai cannot lie. So she meant every word of that. Now, of course, believing one of them was a dragon reborn to destroy the dragon reborn would be, annihilation for the world, basically. But perhaps in her mind, at least, that's better than the dragon reborn succumbing to the persuasion of the Dark One and becoming his agent, his ally.
Yeah, that's the only thing I can reason about why she would have said that, and it made her especially scary. And
Yes,
um, at first I was thinking, well, maybe she just said that so that they would be a little afraid of her and start following a little better. And then I realized, oh wait, no, because it has to literally be true, according
right.
to the three oaths. So she does mean it. She means business, and
Yes,
we've seen how I guess free she is with sort of following what she thinks is the right thing to do versus what would be considered in a normative way moral by everyone else around her, to for the greater good of the world and for this single-minded mission that she's on. So
right. Yeah,
once we know about other things that she's done in context, it's not really that surprising. And she's done some similar things that seemed ethically shady to the people around her, like when she destroyed the ferry with a whirlpool after they crossed the Terran. When Nynaeve was especially upset at her when they were leaving Baerlon together, and the inn was burning down, and Nynaeve is like, "We got to go help them," and Moiraine says, "Well, I mean, think about this. Consider for a moment. We could, but we would probably get killed by Fade. So how about not? I'll send them
right,
some
right.
money to rebuild the inn."
Yes, yes. In fact, there were three different times like that I can think of that. Again, when they destroyed the ferry, she had Lan actually give them gold for it right then. Here's to repay you for your loss. Which they had already paid him enough. He could have built a new ferry and still come out to the good. But still, since she destroyed it, she recompensed him for that without taking any responsibility. The same thing at the end. They're at Barrelon. Yeah, if we go back in, we're dealing with white cloaks, mistrustful people who don't want the white cloaks around, would throw us to them to allay suspicion. We're dealing with murderals, Trollocs, whatever else. Yeah, we are not walking back in there. And again, she made that offer. And then again with Master Gill at the Queen's Blessing, yes, when they were leaving, she said to Master Gill, "If you suffer any hurt over us being here, please just write to," I think it was Varin, no, not Varin Sedai. Wow, I had written it down and now I can't. Sheriam Sedai. Yeah, you write to Sheriam Sedai, the Blue Aja and the White Tower, and she'll make it right. Basically saying out of my funds. We'll pay for this if you suffer any damage if people come and burn down your inn or whatever. So at least she still has this sense of honor and integrity. Kind of, again, her point of view of a noble should take care of his people. Well, she has a mission. She's on this mission, but she doesn't want to bring hurt to people without being able to recompense them in some way. Um, and yeah, I can appreciate that
Yeah, she also
about her.
doesn't have a lot of patience for doing everything in a by the book kind of way and sitting there and sympathizing with people. And, she does
Right.
that sometimes. She
Yeah.
can be very sympathetic, but we've also seen in New Spring what's going through her head at that time. Like, okay, this is a dead end. This isn't getting me anywhere. I get this
Yes.
woman's
Yes.
upset, but she's clearly not the dragon mother. So let's move on.
Right.
And so I can only imagine that to some extent that's what she's like when she's having to deal with obstacles like all the people in Whitebridge who wouldn't tell her why the town had burned down.
Right.
um, and that kind of thing. She seemed to patiently listen to them, but I think a lot of that is outward. I said I calm.
Right. Right. Yeah, and it's kind of strange. She exhibits this S that I call 'em, so many different situations, like when they're getting ready to leave the two rivers. And yes, I know we're hopping around all through this story, but yeah, this is what you got today, folks. We're not very structured today, but we're just studying Moiraine, and she's all throughout this story. So, but when they're getting ready to leave the two rivers, and Egwene shows up, and Lan has his sword halfway out of its scabbard before he realizes who she is, and Moraine's like, she's part of the pattern too. We just let the wheel weave. And then, of course, Tom jumps down out of the loft of the barn. Well, he's already in it. If we leave him, he'll just blab. So yes, let him come along. And three or four different times like that, things just happen. Nynaeve shows up, and of course, I believe Moiraine recognizes the power in Nynaeve and how she could be a great Aes Sedai. So she, kind of slowly, gradually tries to get her to come to the tower for training as well. Knowing that she's a wilder of some great strength. Um, but yeah, it's just she keeps throwing this out there. Well, let the wheel weave as it will. Let's see. And there was another time or two I had written down here, and I can't find it right now. But yeah, she just throws this out there at different times. So it's already part of the pattern. What's woven has been woven. Um, what There's even one place where she says, "What is is." I mean, just like today, the phrase people say, "Well, it is what it is." That's
Yeah.
almost exactly what she was saying.
And
It's
there's the
already been
Spanish
woven.
version too, like que sera, sera. I think that's what will be, or I can't
Okay.
remember if
Well,
it's present or future tense, but yeah, it's a
right.
tattoo I see a lot.
Yeah. Okay. And so yeah, she just keeps throwing this out there. Yet, at the Queen's blessing, when she walks in and sees Matt for the first time, when he's being possessed by the shadow, the evil of Shadow Logoth and the dagger, and she hisses.
Yes, I
Yes.
love it. I just get such goosebumps at that part.
Yes, I mean, I did too. I had forgotten the tension of that moment till I went back and was, gleaning these bits throughout the story. Um,
Yeah, I love how he went to try to stab Moiraine, and then it says something like Lan didn't even bother with the intervening space between the door and
yes,
Matt. He just was
yeah,
there grabbing his wrist. And Moiraine didn't flinch for a moment because she knew
right,
that, her
right,
brother was on his way.
yeah,
I think in that moment, and thinking about all the things Moraine has done that
yes.
are kind of dirty, I think she was contemplating at that moment whether she could actually quarantine Matt magically or whether she might have to kill him and if that might help. Because
Oh, yeah, I never thought of that, but I
um,
bet you're right.
she did say, I will kill you before the Dark One, before I
Yes,
let the Dark One
that's
have
right.
you.
She had made that promise to him back around Barrelon. So
Yeah.
yes,
And I think she's like, if there was a way that would have contained the dagger's evil better, I don't think it would have actually, because the dagger's already
right.
floating
It's already
about,
free. Yes.
able to infect people. I think that's one of the possibilities that ran through her mind, and I think in maybe next episode or the one after, we're going to talk about another time where I think she was very ready if she had to get rid of somebody.
Right.
But I think that yeah, she's not. She'll do it if she has to. We've seen that she'll burn bodies. She'll, you know,
She is a strong woman, strong-willed woman, and she does what it takes, even if she shakes and cries about it privately for a week afterwards. She's going to do whatever she has to do. And you are so perceptive to pick up on that. I missed that entirely. That went completely over my head. But you're right. When you look at it, at the way the events were told, she sent everybody else out of the room. And yes, I think that was very much on the table. I just didn't pick up on it until you said it.
But I didn't think about it until today. That for some reason just popped into my mind.
Right.
So, and I've read that scene. I've heard it talked about.
Ah,
Read analyses of it, and I never thought of it till just this morning for some reason.
right. Uh, I know another little weird thing. Let's just bring this out while you've got us here. Um, she let Lan catch his wrist and hold, obviously to save her life, but she wouldn't let anyone else touch him. Okay, it's like you can be infected from even touching him or being too close to him. And there were two or three times within the story where she said, you have some protection from the fades, the dark friends, whatever, just by being close to me, just by being close to a channeler. But we don't really find that in the rest of the stories. It is almost kind of a throwback to the Tolkien-esque view that some things are just holy or whatever, and by their very nature protect you somewhat from the evil.
Oh, more
Uh,
soft magic type stuff that's like
yes,
very
yes,
diffuse and doesn't have clear rules about it. Yeah, I think
right,
there was more
exactly.
of those soft magic elements in Eye of the World for sure.
Yeah, and that's the only one I can think of right off the top of my head. But I did catch that about two or three different times in the story. Um, but and that's why it's kind of hard to pin down. But I don't recall that anywhere else in the story. So I don't. Well, it starts out. I don't know if she's just trying to calm their nerves, but that would be lying to them. So we'll just kind of see it as a very thin plot hole, and he moved away again from, I love the term you use, soft magic, that I have not thought of before, but we see him moving away from that to magic being more structured, more logical, more reasoned. And it's one of the things I love about the entire Wheel of Time series is the magic makes sense. It makes a logical sense. It's never one of these things where you kind of wish for it and you wave the magic wand and it happens. Transfers of energy and things like that make sense in the real world, almost a physics type way. You could break this magic down by physics, and you got more force here, more force there, and you make these things happen. And energy's flowing from here to there, and you're doing things with it. And I love that about this because so many series they kind of mess that up. Um, even a shout out here to the Terry Brooks and the Elfstones of Shannara series, and all the entire series, Shannara series, Elfstones being my favorite story. But there's so much magic and so much power, yet about the only time you ever see magic used in his world is fire. There's this blazing fire that destroys this or whatever. Very few other times it's like that. That's the way he thinks of magic being used. Um, and here in Jordan's world, you see such variations of it, but it's all based on rules, and the rules make sense, and I love that about it. And it's, to me, so many fantasy authors miss that, but
I was
yeah,
just
we
gonna
have.
say, I think hard and soft magic systems have their uses. I think it's just good to know as a writer which one you're using and maybe
Right,
why. What's the purpose of magic going to be in your story? And so you can see that Brandon Sanderson really loved this hard magic idea, and he really ran with it a lot more in his own works.
right,
Um,
yeah, that's true.
and so his magic in some of his series feels so predictable. I could see the mechanics working in a video game, and it,
Yes,
it just
yep,
feels like I know physically how it operates.
right,
And channeling the one power is very similar, but soft magic serves a different I think a different function in the story. Sometimes it can too easily be a deus ex machina. Okay, we need magic to happen here. So voila,
right,
we need
right,
magic can get us this thing, and there's no
yeah,
consideration of the mechanism. But sometimes soft magic can serve to be this extremely interesting, mystical, spiritual, unexplained kind of force, and it can never really be. Especially if you have a point of view structure combined with that, you might never be
right,
sure whether the magic was real, whether somebody misunderstood something, what
yes.
exactly happened there. And that's a fun element to use to tell stories. But a lot of people use soft magic poorly. And I think we've probably read plenty of series where
Oh
magic
yes.
is just used as a get out of jail
Yeah,
free card
right.
for your characters at some.
Well, now if I may play Forsaken's advocate against my own argument here for a moment, um, perhaps she tried to have them shielded in some way, and that influence can only extend so far. But yeah, because she does things like that at different times. Like one of them, strange if we want to jump very far ahead toward the end of the story when they've gone into the blight in search of the eye of the world. They had to spend the night there in the blight. And of course, they fought their way through various horrible things. And then when they make camp for the night, she does it's kind of a spell or whatever you call it, a weave that she says bends the light around the camp. So you go, like 10 paces or however far in one direction, you turn around, you can't see the fire, you can't see anybody. And Rand sees, I think, Lan walk into it and he just disappears. And so what? It just has this total, mind blown moment there until it's explained to him. Yet we don't see that anywhere else in the story that I can think of, probably because it's something that would only work when you're not moving. Yeah, I imagine a spell like that would, yeah, if you're moving, it would look like a giant reflective bubble walking. So it's going to give it
Yeah.
away.
Well, I think that same concept though is used in other weaves that I at the beginning of this series don't know. Like the Mask of Mirrors is the one that the Forsaken use a lot to disguise their appearance, and so
Oh,
they're really just playing with light or your perception to make you look different to other
right.
people, and then or to make themselves look different to you, and that can be dispelled if you get too close and you like touch them um or you know them too well and you might see some things a little bit off if you knew their smell or something like that.
Yes.
So it's
Yes.
just visual, it's just a light thing from what I understand.
Right.
So yeah, I think it's probably working on the same principle. The
Right.
Mask of Mirrors might be doing some of the same things as those wards that Moiraine said.
Yes. Yeah, I think so. And so perhaps what I perceived as soft magic in this, these 3 or 4 times where she kind of mentioned stay close to me. Maybe it was just a ward of some sort, just something to kind of mask that they were there, what they were doing, at least on the magical plane to those with the senses to look. Um, and I just didn't think of it that way.
Yeah, that was one I didn't even catch, but there were some other magic weirdnesses I caught in the Eye of the World. I mean, finding the Green Man is definitely a soft magic thing. Um,
Yes, yes, you're right.
but
But
then there's a
because
few others about the one power, so that might be not one power related, and I guess that makes sense. There are things outside of the one power in his world building, and that's acceptable. I can hang with that. But also, even with the one power, I think he did know from the beginning. It seemed like he set out to have a hard magic system, but
yes,
he didn't have all the rules fully articulated, and so you can kind of see them develop a little bit over time. And so I think there's some weird things like Moiraine has a staff in this book that she
right,
doesn't ever replace. I mean, it seems like it was apparently useful as a concentration tool, but apparently not that useful because after it got destroyed in the waves, she never picked another one back up.
right, right.
Um, and I think that was just more of the visual wizard character thing. Really, I think it
Ah,
was.
yes,
I think it was another thing to kind of
just
plug in that Gandalf kind of archetype a
yeah,
little bit.
right,
And so he didn't need it after book one. I also think that there's a thing where part of how she tells Nynaeve that she can channel is that when you've healed somebody, you feel connected to them and you can sense them. But that's a little weird to me because we don't see those implications really show up later in the series. It's like they don't play with that idea anymore.
Oh, well, maybe so. Now, in my mind, when you said that, it was sort of the delving that the healers do. They're basically doing a mental MRI of the person, and that's what I took it as. I didn't take it to mean you could feel connected to them after you've walked away after the end of it. Maybe that's how it was written in here, and I just didn't catch it because
I think
I
it
looked
is
at it
because
from a
she's
different
like,
point
have
of
you
view.
ever noticed that you can feel Egwene come up behind you when you don't see her?
Okay. You're right. I just totally missed that. I was oblivious to that completely. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that out. That is cool. Even though it's a kind of a hole in the story because the magic doesn't continue to work that way, or at least not that we see. Um, that's pretty cool, and it just totally went over my head. I missed it completely. Um, well, in a world this vast and covering this many thousands of pages, how can you not have a few small inconsistencies? And thankfully, most of these are very few. They're very small. He did such an awesome job of world building. So, what are some other favorite moments from this story?
I like.
Moraine moments, I should say.
Oh yeah. Well, I like when she makes herself look giant to intimidate the White
Uh,
Cloaks.
yes, leaving Barrelon.
And that's another point where people are confused about what she's doing with the magic. And the best answer I saw was that the the part of her that walked over the wall was just an illusion, while she actually
Yes,
just probably physically walked through the gate around where everybody was gaping at her. So almost like a mask of mirrors situation.
exactly. That's what I thought the first time I read it. I didn't think she actually grew to that size so much. It just made that because in just a moment, she kind of shrinks back down, and here she's riding her horse, back to join the rest of the party. So it was a way to get their attention, a little misdirection, because again, if you look back to what was written later but happened chronologically before, so a white cloak's arrow through your heart will kill you just as surely as anything. So yeah, that's my explanation for it. Yeah, she created the illusion, like you said, the light. You take that image and you just expand it, and while everybody's looking at that, either awed by it or I don't know, trying to look up her skirt, kind of how crazy these different soldiers were, then she just kind of rides the horse on, around, and nobody's paying attention to her. That's my mental image of that. They were all, the horses were spooked. Everybody's running because had she really grown that size, that would not have been the only time we saw that. And she could have kicked a hole in the wall and walked through it instead of just stepping over it, leaving everything unscathed. Because I imagine at the end of that night there were no giant footprints there. There was just a party that had moved on.
I didn't really think about it that much at the time. I kind of thought the first time I read it through, since I didn't know how the magic worked, I assumed she just did make herself big. And then later I was like, oh, that's weird. Maybe he hadn't fully figured out what I said I could do yet. And um, now, yeah, the illusion part makes a lot more sense to me, but for some reason I
Yeah.
didn't quite catch that.
Uh,
And so many of these Moraine moments I keep using to just talk about the magic system. And sorry, I keep doing that.
oh no.
I've got some others. So I like when Moraine was making the decision with Lan about whether to go into Shadow Logoth,
Hmm.
because it felt a lot like Gandalf's decision to go into Moria, where he's like, "No,
Yes.
not there. I can't do that. This place is evil and cursed and dangerous, but I guess it's the lesser, slightly by just a hair, dangerous path."
Right.
And so, yeah, when she had to do that, she did tell them it was spooky, but she didn't tell them enough, which is classic Moraine.
Yes.
Didn't
Yeah.
tell them enough not to get themselves into trouble there. But yeah, I just really love that decision point of her going, we can't do that, but we have to. And I'm wondering what is
Yes.
coming up next. Where are they going?
Right. And in my memory, I had thought basically that she just kind of led them there. Like you said, a little more like the Mines of Moria, but they were driven there. She did everything to keep from making that decision, and they really had no choice. And it was Lan who made the decision to go in more so than Moiraine. At least upon rereading it, or he mentions it several times as a possibility, and she finally acquiesces. But yes, she did not want to do it, because knowing how dangerous it was. And like you said, she, even though she gave this speech about Aradal and went into storyteller mode and told them the history of it, she did not say, "Listen, when you get here, you stay in this place I'm going to ward, and you don't go out into the fog. You don't talk to anybody. You don't pick up anything." And it probably would not have stopped them. Let's agree right now. Matt would have picked up a gold coin, would have picked up a dagger, and would have hidden it and lied about it just like he did. Or and none of them told that part. Which, in rereading it, it doesn't talk about Matt picking up the dagger. That's something you find out really later after they're separated. Right, right. So Perrin and Rand, I don't think even saw him do it
Right. They weren't
because it was
complicit in that lie by omission, but that was all on
right,
that.
right, and that was the last time they saw Moiraine until until she meets up with him at Camlin when he's already so infected and very near death and very near being taken by the shadow. So yeah, you can kind of see them not telling it. But then about the same time they're in Camlin, they start talking about the dreams of that they've had with Baal-Zaman, and she had literally asked him, "You tell me if you dream anything strange."
I know it's
And
in
they
like the first chapter. She's like, Randolph Thor, how are your dreams? The first
right,
time she shows up, it's like
yeah,
the second time she shows up, it's still.
yes, yeah. It was just crazy that, but I guess that was just something that seemed so scary and so private. They did talk about it amongst themselves once or twice, but even then, as little as possible. But then, yeah, they finally break down and tell her they. And of course, that's also the time when in the same room in Camlin where they they find out about the Dark One being after the Eye of the World from three different sources. They each heard the story from somewhere else in a very unlikely situation. Some of it where you would not think, why would a dying Aiel tell this story to the Tinkers who would tell it to Perrin, or why would this wretch, this beggar come through, even mention this story that got passed along? But it did from those three different sources. And again, they explain it with the Taverin, which I've heard other people talk about that being just such a way to make things go easy, being Taverin. Oh, there's a way to explain all these coincidences. I need, these 10 things to happen and all the stars to align for, this part of the story to work. But I still like that. I still like that about the Taverin because even though I know it's not real, you do see in history, in the real world, there are some people, it seems like history pivots around them. You have the Alexander the Great, you have the Winston Churchills, you have the people of the world who step up from obscurity and make a huge difference in the world. Jonas Salk, Dr. Jonas Salk. I mean, you have these people who, it seems like the history pivots on them and everything turns and changes at that point. And most of that is from us looking back, and the way our histories are written, or the way we see things change and great changes in societies or cultures or whatever. But it's kind of a way to explain that and to make that happen to our characters. And bring in all the coincidences that need to be there. But I like it, even though I don't see it as a cheat or a cop out. I see it as a great part of the story, and to me, it sounds weird, even though it's unreal. It lends a little bit of credulity to the things that happen in the story.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's another way of him making so much of his world kind of again a hard magic system where he has this mechanism of how they can explain parts of the ways that the pattern work, and when evil things happen, like these bubbles of evil that show up in future books, they can explain, it how it's something happening in the pattern itself.
Right, right.
And I do appreciate that. There's occasionally where I'm like, okay, Taviran, yeah, I get it. um, but I think it's kind of funny because I can just imagine it as Robert Jordan kind of winking at the reader, like, we all do this as authors. We all have to twist everything to get to these plot points. So I've just named it and put it all out there for you to
Right.
see.
Yeah, I'm not
Um,
going to hide it. It's just here
yeah,
in front of you. Yeah.
yeah. He's like, we both know. That's kind of how I see it, and so I just sort of laugh at it usually if it seems like it's a little difficult to believe. Um, but yeah, I think that's something that makes the world building very unique in this story, and yeah, I think we say that in almost every episode, I feel
Oh
like.
yeah, yeah.
But
Um,
yeah, I'm starting to run out of points. Did you have some favorite
I,
Moraine moments or
I
something?
have something. It's not so much one of my favorite Moraine moments. I'll throw this in, and then I'll get to one more point that I wanted to bring out. Uh, when they get to Faldara, of course, by traveling through the ways, and right at the very end, the Black Wind, Machin Sheen is coming at them, about to attack them, and Moraine has to cut through the stones there to get out because there was the little trigger, whatever the leaf they used to open it was not there, and so literally she just pulls a Qui-Gon Jinn and cuts through the blast doors
That's
just so they can
exactly what
they can
I
all get out.
picture too. I wonder if pretty much everybody does. I don't know, but I can't
Probably
unsee that.
so. Right, right. Um, but so I kind of like that, and she's the last one out. She backs out, using that staff that now becomes worthless because it's so tainted and everything by what she's done there. And of course, they hear those voices in the Machin Sheen talking about shredding skin and braiding it and all these horrible things. It's just barely on the edge of perception, but they hear these horrible, horrible things. And Egwene, she's just kind of really shaken. It's just like this. But I hear things. And Moiraine looks at her and says, "There's worse to be faced yet."
Oof.
Oh, well, thank you. It's not what I wanted to hear.
Yeah,
Go
she's
back
not a
home now.
comforting person.
No.
She's not good at that.
Yeah, yeah. If I was Egwene, I'd be like, okay, may I be excused? I'm going back home right now. Um, you hear this horrible thing, and then, well, there's worse to be faced yet. Like, you at least put your arm around me and say it's going to be okay. But she
She
doesn't.
has no time for that. She has no
No,
patience for other
no,
people's feelings.
no.
There's stuff to be done, and it's gonna be ugly.
Right. Now, this last part, I I looked around, and by the way, big shout out to library.tarvalin.net. You guys are awesome. Yes, I started going through this book using that, finding Moiraine's point of view, and I just kind of stopped and I just skimmed through the entire book, skipping the chapters that did not have Moiraine. I did it all, a few hours. It's no big deal, but just really skimming fast. Occasionally, something would be so interesting I had to stop and read a chapter. But there was one thing I caught when and I'll kind of put this out there. Maybe some of our listeners has an answer, and they can reply to you on Twitter, and get some dialogue opened up there. But we had been under the impression, when we finished New Spring, that when she and Siouan parted at the end of New Spring, that they did not see each other again until, I think it's the Great Hunt. But at the beginning of the Eye of the World, when Moiraine has the Angreal, and she's kind of talking about the fading of the tower and all that, and she talked about the Angreal and how the ability to make these have been lost, and she says, you know, let's see if I can. I don't have the quote down, so I'm trying to pull this from memory. She says something about, these are very precious and few, and uh, basically, I would not have been able to take it out of Tarvalon without the Amerlin's approval. And again, I should have looked this up, but she says something about that. And then toward the end of the book, when they're in Faldara, right before they go up into the Blight to find the Eye of the World, Padan Thane has been caught and captured. And she goes and questions him. And she comes out and talks about how, well, he's been looking for you boys for 3 years. He's been a dark friend his entire life, but he's been looking for you boys kind of specifically for 3 years. He didn't know who he was looking for, but looking for boys at this certain age in this certain area. And she talks about 3 years. If only my sisters and I at Tarvalin had those 3 years to prepare. So she makes it sound like she's been to Tarvalin in the ensuing years. And I'm not sure, because I have not looked through the Great Hunt for this, but I expect to do this, and hopefully some of our listeners will get in on this too. Uh, has Moiraine been back to Tarvalin? And in my mind, she would have done so after Siouan became the Amerlin seat, because whenever a new Amerlin comes in, one of the first things she does is basically gives pardons to all the sisters who've been punished for various things. That typically they don't all do that, but according to New Spring, that's what happens oftentimes. So was she kind of forgiven and pardoned for running away in the beginning, comes back, spends a little time in Tarvalin, and goes back out on her mission? Or is this just a mess up of the author? So we'll get into that, I guess, a little more in the next book. And if anybody else knows of details like that, send that our way, because I'll be honest with you folks, I love this story, but I've not read it enough. I've gone through the entire thing one time, some of these books twice, maybe three times now. But not in depth like some people, and I'm just old, and I don't have the memory that I used to have. So it's very possible that I'm just missing great big things that are spelled out, and neon signs, and I'm just missing them completely.
They're good at
Um,
holding us accountable so far. I've enjoyed it.
and I like that. I like that, because
Yes.
we want to give you a good podcast. We want to give you something you enjoy. So yeah, if there's anything like that, please let us know. Tweet it out, and we will make the corrections. But that's all I've got, Lajara. Thank you so much. I've enjoyed this one, I guess, because I had to study a little harder for it.
Yeah.
Going through the entire
I'm
book.
sorry, I didn't mean to make it too onerous, but I really liked this
Ooh,
loose structured one anyway. We got to relax a little bit,
yeah,
it feels like, with the
yes,
way that we recorded today.
right, yeah, and not having as much of a synopsis and the structure thing, but we're just kind of bouncing back and forth. But yes, I love that. I enjoy that. No, this was not onerous at all, because I got to read a book, and that's still a fun thing for me. Thank you all for being with us. Please join us next time for episode 12. We will cover chapters 4 and 5 of The Great Hunt.
You can find us on Podbean, Stitcher, Google Play Podcasts, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. You can also stay updated on Twitter at Lajara, that's LAJARASEDAI, or subscribe to our YouTube channel of the same name. You can also reach us at the email address lajaradane, DAYNE, @gmail.com. Tell them bye, Giskell.
Goodbye, Giskell.
All right, I guess it's about time for you to leave, isn't it?
It is.
Okay.
Thank you. This has been a fun one. Like I said,
Yeah.
there's nothing onerous about it at all.
Oh, good. We jumped around a lot, but I really liked it still.
We did. And I did get to glance at your notes because you were good and typed them up and put them on the Google Drive, which I did not. I had mine written out.
But we covered everything I had. Either you already said it or I had notes on it here, and we covered it. And I had 3 handwritten pages of notes. So yeah, I was more prepared, but it was so much fun. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, have a good rest of your evening then. I love you.
I love you too. You take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.